So let's look at the ministry of Jesus now. Again, he's the Messiah, which means king, by the way. He's the king of Israel, son of God, all titles to do with his Davidic descent. There's this very important verse in John 1:17. The law was given through Moses, grace and truth through the Messiah Jesus. So right there, it signals something new. There's a shift now going on. And then if we look at Hebrews chapter 7, so this is all to do with the fact that there's a new high priest in town. Verse 11, the Old Testament priesthood was founded based on the law of Moses. And then as is 12 to 14, the law of Moses was changed. Why? Because the priesthood changed. There's a new priestly order established by God himself. Under the law of Moses, Jesus is disqualified, who was not, note, not from the tribe of Levi. That's one of the things that strikes me about this, right? That under the law of Moses, Jesus is not qualified to be a high priest, which he was on earth, I would argue. Jesus forgave sins during his days on earth. He obviously healed people. These are priestly functions. He mediates during his life here, was the comforter during the days of his life. So these are all priestly things that he's doing. So this new priest is not from the family of Levi. Verses 11, 15, 17. And just to stress again, this priestly system is mandated by the law of Moses. And then there's a different system. You see that? Verse 12 is of utmost importance. The law changed. Which law? The law of Moses, the law that dictated the Levitical priesthood system. It was changed. It's right there. So this is a fulfillment of Psalm 110, and it comes from verse 4, which is what the Hebrews writer is citing. Now, if you note, actually, let's go to Psalm 110. But if you see there in the previous verse 3, yes, God prophesied that this new priest would be his own son. In the Greek translation, now we're looking at the Hebrew or Masoretic text, but if you look at the Greek translation of this verse, it says that he is begotten from the womb. So in the same way, he was to be the new high priest from the womb, just as he was the Son of God from the womb, according to the Gospel of Luke. So that is found in the Greek translation, which the Hebrew just says, as you can see there, from the womb of the dawn, but that is a reference to the virgin birth, I believe. So then if we go back to Hebrews 7, again, just that section there, verses 11 to 17. So note, the received law under the Old Covenant, the legislation given by Moses, has been changed, replaced, and then in Hebrews 8:6, that last phrase has been enacted on better promises. It's variously translated, enacted, or established. Now, that comes from a compound Greek word, and that's the words law, to put or place. The translations here don't quite help, but if you would look at that, the Greek word behind has been enacted, you will see what I'm talking about. So basically, I think what this passage, especially verse 6, is saying, if you would paraphrase it, so for this new covenant obtained by the work of Christ, what he did during the days of his life, as the Hebrews writer says, not at the cross. I mean, you can't do anything while you're dying horrible death on a cross. So it's something that he had already done, and what he did has become a ministry far superior to the first covenant at Sinai. So that's why the covenant Jesus currently mediates is better. Then the writer says, more than that, this new covenant is given to us Christians as Torah, as the law, on the basis of better promises. So to put it simply, just as Moses legislated the law at Sinai, right? The law from Sinai. Jesus now is the legislator, if you will, of something new, something better, a better covenant. So the new covenant law was established when Christ came or appeared on earth. And then we read the following chapter. So verse 11, very important. So Christ came. He came as high priest. He appeared. He arrived on the scene of human history, if you will. That's what the meaning should be there. And it's interesting that the writer of Hebrews compares Jesus to King Melchizedek, that sort of shadowy figure of Genesis 14. And you'll note that Melchizedek was king of Jerusalem, Salem, and he appears as high priest. So he appears as as those two functions already, Melchizedek, king and priest. So it makes sense for the Hebrews writer to look back, prefiguring this prototype, if you will, that was Melchizedek as a parallel. Jesus also appears, well, not out of the blue, not suddenly, but obviously he's born high priest and priest of the Most High God. The next point here I want to bring up is based on the fact that a covenant has to have words. So you could ask the question, so where would you find the words of the new covenant? And a good start is here on the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus begins with the famous Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed those who mourn, who are gentle. By the way, the blessings here almost add up to 10. It would be a sort of perfect replacement, wouldn't it, to the so-called 10 words or the 10 commandments. But there's about around 9 blessings here, but I guess if you take out the Sabbath, it would fit perfectly. But the words of the covenant are the words of Jesus, is the preaching of Jesus, I should say. So you can start with that, but then people oftentimes will bring up, if they haven't already in the chat, Matthew 5:17, right? So Jesus goes on to say, do not think that I came to abolish the law, that is the law of Moses, or the prophets. And then he says, I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Now note immediately that Jesus did not say, I came to keep the law. He said he came to give it its full meaning, if you will, to accomplish its purpose, its mission, so it finds an end. Again, this sounds very much like Luke 16:16, doesn't it? The law and the prophets until John. Jesus famously says here, there's a fulfillment. The fulfillment comes in the form, I believe, of what he already said regarding blessings, which are commandments. You shall inherit the earth. You have to be pure in heart. You have to be merciful. You have to be a peacemaker. These are commandments too. And also what comes afterwards. One thing we have to agree upon is that Jesus is not repeating Moses. In other words, Jesus is not saying something like, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Yes, keep it up. Keep going. I don't know how he would have repeated that, but yeah, great. Keep obeying that. I don't know, something like that. No, but I say, or other translations, and I say, that's a clear and what they call an antithesis, a contrast, a distinction. The other thing I need to note here before I forget, some people say, well, Jesus didn't say it is written, an eye for an eye, tooth. No, he said you have heard it said. So Jesus is not saying anything against the written law. He's saying, what people have said about it, or the traditions of the Jews or man or whatever. Well, an eye for an eye and a tooth, for example, just as one example, is verbatim from the written law. It doesn't matter, Jesus said, you have heard it said. The same as if he would have said it is written, because guess what? You shall love your neighbor. It is written. Obviously, most people heard this, but what they heard is based from the written law. So that's very important to say. So the point here is that Jesus, to me, it doesn't sound like he's repeating Moses. He's not repeating the laws given to Moses. Under Moses, you could kill your enemy. So an eye for an eye, like I said, that's from Leviticus 24, Exodus 22. But under Jesus, you have to love your enemies. To me, that's a clear distinction from the law of Moses. People say it's only in a few places that you can maybe argue, well, all you need is one, right? In other words, all you need is one clear, explicit statement that sounds contradictory or different from the written law, the Torah, the law of Moses, for it to come into question. So if you take away one piece of the law, the center cannot hold. It's part of the whole. And then you can keep going in the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 19, Jesus talks about the certificate of divorce that Moses granted the people because their hearts were so hardened, he says. But I say to you in Matthew 19, that's another clear overturning of a Mosaic system or Mosaic laws. So these are the New Covenant words. You continue to read through the Gospel of Matthew, and you will clearly see that Jesus did not just come to repeat Moses. I mean, that would be a waste of God's time.